the mid-90s, I ended up being the director of sales for both Forest Lakes and Glenmore. Glenmore today is 800 homes, average sales price $750,000. And so at that time, I was barely even 30, I was overseeing these two large communities, and we had our hands on all the builders, and our business kind of grew and grew and grew. And during that, one of the the real bummers of my life was that my father-in-law ended up passing away of prostate cancer. 2003, he passed away, and at the end of his life, he and I became best friends. At the very end of his life, when he was in a wheelchair, he had a radical conversion to Christianity. In fact, when he was in a coma, he was a non-religious person at all. And when he was in a coma, he came out of the coma and told me many, many times about how he met Jesus in this coma. And so at the time, as he was telling me this, and right before he died, I had a little nugget of faith in my life, but not a huge, roaring faith. And so he died in 2003. And so that was a very sad time, but business is business, and business keeps going on. And if you remember, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006 were incredible times in the business world. And so things just got bigger for me business-wise. Not only was I overseeing Forest Lakes and Glenmore at that time, let me just throw out a few other things I was doing. I was also overseeing all the sales in Old Trail and Spring Creek, and I was in charge of all of the condo conversions in town. I did Hessian Hills, 1800 JPA, Barracks West until it crashed, Villas at Southern Ridge, Walker Square in River Bend were just some of the projects that I was doing. Everything just kind of kept piling and piling and piling. And so at that time, you know, when things are going really well and the money's flowing and the business is biggering and everything's biggering, I had 4 children, happy marriage. I was like, gosh, life is fantastic. Yet I remember during that time also being a little bit restless about, you know, I remembered some of the conversations I had with my father-in-law before he passed away about his conversion to Christianity. And so that kind of intrigued me to go back in about 2006, 2007. I started to try to figure out the Bible. So I started reading the Bible. Didn't get very far. Had a lot of friends try to explain it to me. And then, but I just kept kind of pursuing it, trying to figure it out. And then I had this situation happen in my life, and that's what I want to talk about. The kind of the title of my talk is Faith During the Furnace. It was really faith in business, but it was really faith when business goes bad. Like, it's easy to have, you know, a happy countenance when the business is biggering and lots of money and everybody's happy. But what happens to you when you hit the wall? What happens to you when a challenge comes up in your life? And the challenge that came up for me that changed my life was something that totally came out of the blue. One day I get a phone call. It's June 30th, 2009. It's the deepest part of the recession, but we're still doing okay. But it's a deep part of this real estate recession. Long story short, and I won't take you through all the details, but my brother-in-law, my then brother-in-law, went missing. And for 28 days, we did not know where he was. And we had, after my father-in-law died, we had a division of labor. I ran the real estate company. He ran Glenmore Country Club, which our family owned at the time, and all the land holdings. And so he's gone, and we didn't know what happened to him. We thought he might have committed suicide because of the pressure. You know, a lot of people in the Depression really had a tough way of handling it. Or did he have, you know, was there a gambling situation? Was there another woman, another man? We didn't know. We didn't know. 28 days, gone. And so during that time, because there was nobody left, my father-in-law had passed away, my then brother-in-law was missing, my mother-in-law at the time was 75 years old. She was not going to run the country club and the development company. So they pushed me out there. Go, Jeff, you can do it. Well, I went up to the country club my first day and I met with the controller and I found out that money was missing. And we had to make payroll. Payroll was every week. There was 110 employees at the club. And then we found out a couple of days later that money had been stolen from the homeowners association. And we put all the pieces together and realized what happened. Later on, we realized, and he's around today, he's no longer part of the family, but he was arrested for embezzlement and tax evasion and went to jail. But this 28-day period was a period in my life when he was gone. It was me, and I got a little bit of support from my wife and family, certainly moral support, and my mother-in-law, but it was really me trying to navigate the biggest real estate depression that we've all been a part of, and now we had to come up with $666,000. That was the amount of money that was stolen. 666.
Whoa.
Oh, that just gave me chills.
666.
Wow.
I changed the premium when a homeowner's quote comes out like that, or all.
Yeah, right.
I'll add towing or something. That's $4.
So,
666.
so it was really, really, really hard time. And, you know, that 28-day period when we didn't know, and his family had moved in with us. So in my house was my mother-in-law, my wife, my kids, and then his wife and their kids. So we're all kind of trying to weather the storm together under one roof. And during that time of crisis and panic, that was when I met God during my deepest, darkest time. And I realized that His Word is true and that His promises are many and they're beautiful. And so that's, I'm going to keep an eye on the clock here, but I'm going to go another 15 minutes or so and kind of just tell you some things that I found during my time during the furnace. Now, I also want to stretch that out so you know there was this 28-day period, but it's really been a 6.5-year period because what we figured out was everything that kind of got jumbled up while he was gone. There was $29 million worth of debt. Now, we had assets against the debt, but there was $29 million worth of debt that had to be serviced. And ultimately, we had to sell. So we, you know, I didn't know what to do. And there was a part of me that just wanted out. Like, where's the exit? How can I get out of this movie, this nightmare movie? How can I get out? And then, you know, I looked at my mother-in-law, and she was the guarantor of all the notes. And so I'm not going to leave her during this. So I just said, God, you just tell me what to do, and I'll do it. And so it was literally during this time, well, the first thing he said came in loud and clear. You are a salesman and you can sell these assets. These are sellable assets, so start selling. And we have put together some of the craziest real estate deals I've ever been in. We sold a country club that was underwater, that had $300,000 accounts payable due, $250,000 in back taxes. I mean, we put together a deal to sell that was, and all the while, everyone in Glenmore was, the pressure was on, because here's what happens. If that club goes bankrupt, then there were 700 homeowners there. If that club goes bankrupt, everybody's home has just taken a whew. So that everywhere I went, it wasn't,
What are you doing?
go get them, Jeff. It was,
When are you getting it done?
everybody was breathing on me. And it was hard. And our family's name went from, just being a kind of a great community name to what did they do and how did they screw up the community? And so, anyway, some of the promises, and I have a little handout here for you at the end, some of the promises that I found in God's Word. The first one was what tended to pick on me during this time was fear and doubt. I was incredibly afraid, and I saw all these possible scenarios in my mind of everything that could go wrong, how the worst possible way that this could go. And so the enemy, in spiritual warfare, they talk about the enemy, and the enemy kept kind of playing that on me as how bad that this could be. And when I read the Bible, I found in the book of Joshua, in the Old Testament, first chapter, one of the versions says, just simply put, banish fear and doubt. And so now, almost 7 years later, when I'm talking to my kids and they're going through a tough time and fear and doubt is coming into their life, I look at it as almost like two ping pong paddles that I have. And when fear and doubt come, I just swat them away, because the enemy wants you fearful. But if you can banish the fear and doubt, if you can just kind of push that aside, then you can kind of walk through to the purpose that I believe that God has for each one of us. And so the first step for me was I got to get rid of the fear and doubt. And the big way that I was able to do that was I spent a long time reading and rereading the Bible. And when I would find a verse, I would really kind of soak my brain in it. And really, the Apostle Paul talks about in his letter to the Romans, he says, do not be conformed to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Don't be conformed, don't do what the world does, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so I found that to be absolutely necessary. When bad things happen to you, stay grounded in the Word. God will show you the way. And He showed me. I said to Him numerous times, I said to Him, God, the only way that we're getting out of this is if you run the table. I mean, everything has to happen perfectly. We got to sell that, and before... picture this. This is what it was like. So, do y'all know the Indiana Jones movie? What was the very first one called? Raiders of the Lost Ark. Do you remember when that boulder in the opening scene is coming down and he's... That's been me for 6.5 years, but not quite that. But you get the picture. The only way, God, that we get out of this is that if you run the table. And in his beautiful, sweet way, he said to me, well, I actually own the table. So just his message to me was also just kind of watch what I do here. Just watch what I can do. But you got to listen. You got to be obedient. You got to banish the fear and the doubt. And then the second thing that in some of y'all probably know the Bible better than I do, but in Genesis they talk about the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. And the punchline to Genesis, to Joseph's life, he had a lot of bad things happen to him. He was Jacob's favorite child, gets sold off into slavery, and he ends up being thrown in jail, and he spends a good number of years in jail, but then he ends up getting out of jail, and as a result of all kind of the tragedy that he went through, he ends up saving the nation of Israel as a result of all that. But the punchline of Joseph's life was, what the enemy meant for bad, God will use for good. And so that's Genesis chapter 50, verse 20 in my own kind of version of that. But I mean, that's basically what it says. What the enemy meant for bad, God will use for good. And so when you're going through the tragedies and the tough things in life, whether it's an illness, the death of a family, in my case it was a business crisis, if you grab a hold of that promise and make it your pillow at night and say, God, I don't see the good, but I'm holding on here because it says, Genesis chapter 50 verse 20. And then the New Testament version of that is in Romans chapter 8. The Apostle Paul says all things work for good for those who love God. So I made those my pillows at night, and so when I woke up in the morning, I was able to kind of get a fresh word from God. And so here's the long story short. During all of this, God did run the table for us. We sold this Rivanna Village piece in the front of Glenmore. We sold the back of Glenmore. We sold numerous office buildings and all these rental units that were all behind in everything, HOA dues and real estate taxes. But we just went, pop, 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 pop. God delivered. And I really believe that although my balance sheet today is not nearly what it was in 04, 05, 06, I really believe that, well, I'll tell you this. Although I wouldn't want any of you all to go through kind of that type of suffering and crisis and craziness, I would say I would not trade that for anything. Because during the darkest times is when I found God to be real. And he revealed himself to me. And here's the very last thing I'm going to say, because Angie told me I get 5 more minutes. So great. Thank you, God. I praise him every day, all day long. And 10 or certainly 15 years ago, I would be probably the last person to be talking about faith in business. It just really kind of wasn't who I was. And so now I like to talk about it because during that time I was touched deeply, and so I like to kind of share that message with other people so they understand that that when that tough time comes, that you can rely on the promises, you can stand in and on the promises of God, and He will deliver. But here's the punchline of what I wanted to say. I have a real estate radio show. Some of you have been on that radio show. The reason I have a real estate radio show is that one of my competitors, Michael Guthrie of Roy Wheeler, has a radio show, and so when he started the radio war, he had his radio show first. All my agents came running to me saying, "We need a radio show," which was.
We know him.
And I like Michael very much.
Yeah,
He's a very good friend.
The same church.
Trinity.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to do a real estate radio show, and I do that, and so. But I've done it 5 years, and so when you do it every week for 5 years, I'm not saying you get good, but you know how to do it. And so 2 years ago, the radio station came to me because I'd shared a couple of nuggets of faith, and they said to me, would you ever consider hosting a radio show on faith on this station? And I said, no, I would not consider doing that. I am not qualified for that. And they said, well, that's exactly why it would be a good idea. Somebody who's just really kind of interested. So long story short, of being obedient again, I said I would try it. And so I started a radio show that's on every Sunday at 9:30 in the morning on 107.5 FM. It's called Everyday Faith. Michael Guthrie's been on twice. I interview people about their faith, and I ask them, tell me about your faith journey, and I never know what I'm going to get. And then the second half of the show, I ask them what's their favorite story in the gospel, and we kind of just talk about that, and that's the radio show. And so I didn't really, I kind of told God, I said, look, I'll try it for a month, and then if it's just not working, I'm gonna bag it, but you told me to do it, so I'll do it. So here's how, this is how I knew something was going on with the radio show, is my parents live at Westminster, Canterbury. They're older. My mom's 85, my dad's 91. They can't get out to go to church. And so when I started this radio show, I was brought up in such a manner that during my younger life, we didn't really share our faith with people. That just kind of wasn't really seen as what you do in our household growing up. So I never told my parents I was doing a radio show on faith. I was afraid to be a little bit mortified about it. Who was this evangelist boy? And so it was like there's a shuttle bus at Westminster, Canterbury, and my mother could still get out to go to church, and my dad couldn't. He's in his own room. And so on the way back from church one day, my mom was getting off the bus, and some man almost ran her over getting off the bus, and he was like, my mom's name is Helene, and he said, excuse me, Helene, and he kind of hustles down the stairs in the bus, and he turns to my mother and says, I'm going inside to listen to this program on the radio called Everyday Faith. And then he turns to my mom and says, are you related to the Gaffney that hosts that show? and my mom goes, ay. So she was afraid of so she goes in and has a listen. 2 weeks later, I go to visit my parents, and the nurse on the way down to their room stopped me and said, I got a beef with you. I said, what's your problem? Okay. And she said, you're causing a traffic jam on Sunday morning here. I said, what are you talking about? I found out, so my father is a World War II veteran, and that generation loves the radio. So he's got a radio that's like this big, and he's in a wheelchair. Plugs it in an extension cord, brings his big radio out into the hallway, and at 9:30 every Sunday morning at Westminster, Canterbury, all the little wheelchairs come down, and that's their church.
That's great.
And so when I heard that, I said, okay, God, I get it, I understand, you've got a plan, and so that's the end of my talk, but I just wanted you to know that what the enemy meant for bad, God will use for good.
You're right. Yeah.
Good story.
Good story.
I'll check out your radio show.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
107.5, 9:30.
9:30 on Sundays.
We were proud of you anyway, but I'm even prouder. Because I remember that. I lived here, and I remember seeing it in the media and stuff. So, you know, you never know the whole story. So it's so good to, have you forgiven him?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I had a whole forgiveness thing with him while he was in jail. And that's a story for another time. It was a very, very powerful moment of forgiveness. And it was one of those ones where I learned a lot during this time about how to forgive people in general. And God gave me lots of opportunities to forgive people because there was a lot of craziness that happened. But one of the key takeaways I learned was to forgive people even when they don't say they're sorry.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unconditional forgiveness.
Wow.
Wow.
That's good.
So, I mean, it goes without saying, I'm far from anywhere near perfect. I have problems every day, issues. I keep struggling with this and that, but what God has done has just been amazing. And so, again, whenever I have an opportunity to talk now, I talk about faith.
That's good.
Yeah, thank you.